I was 32 when I realised my family would never read a single word I wrote. The laptop screen glowed in the dark. 11:47 p.m, showing in the corner beside the document that held 60,000 words of my novel. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly, from exhaustion and something else. Hope, maybe, or delusion. Behind me, the door opened without a knock. "Still writing that thing?" My mother's voice carried the familiar edge of disappointment. "Rachel, it's almost midnight. Don't you have work tomorrow?" I didn't turn around. My eyes stayed fixed on the paragraph I'd been revising for the third time, watching the cursor blink in the silence. "Your sister called," she continued, moving into the room uninvited. "Elena got promoted again, district manager now, 28 years old and already making 6 figures. A pause waited with meaning. "She asked about you. I didn't know what to say." My hands fell to my lap. The words on the screen blurred slightly. "I told her you were still pursuing your hobby." Hobby. The word landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through my chest. 3 years of early mornings and late nights, 4 completed manuscripts, 17 query letters sent to literary agents, 2 requests for partial manuscripts that led nowhere, and it was still just a hobby. "Mom, Elena's husband is taking her to Paris to celebrate." "Paris, Rachel? When was the last time James took you anywhere nice?" I closed the laptop slowly, feeling something inside me close with it. "James and I are fine." "Fine." She repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "That's exactly the problem. You're always just fine. Fine job, fine apartment, fine marriage. Meanwhile, your sister is thriving because she focused on something real instead of wasting time on fantasies." The door closed behind her, but her presence lingered like smoke. I sat in the darkness, listening to the hum of the laptop's fan, feeling the weight of her words settle into the familiar grooves they'd worn into my consciousness over the years. My phone buzzed. "James, working late again. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, then at the closed laptop, then at my hands, pale, thin, the nails bitten short from anxiety I pretended not to feel. The apartment was silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall, each second marking time I was supposedly wasting. I opened the laptop again. The document stared back at me, full of words I'd bled onto the page, characters I'd breathed life into, a story I believed it in even when no one else did. My finger hovered over the save button. Instead, I opened my email. The draft I'd been too afraid to send sat at the top. My resignation letter from the accounting firm where I'd worked for 8 years. Below it, another draft. A message to a small independent publisher I'd found online, a last desperate attempt before I gave up entirely. I closed, both without sending them. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of James moving through the apartment. I found him in the kitchen, already dressed for work, scrolling through his phone with one hand while his coffee cooled forgotten on the counter. "Morning," I said. He glanced up briefly. "Morning. Did you finish that project you were working on?" For a moment, I thought he meant my novel. My heart lifted slightly. "Almost, the Anderson account, reconciliation. Your boss emailed me asking if you were okay. Said you seemed distracted lately." My heart settled back into its usual place. "I'll finish it today." "Good." He returned to his phone. "Elena and David invited us to dinner Friday. Celebration for her promotion. Your mum's coming too." Of course she was. "Okay. Try to be enthusiastic, Rachel. I know you and your sister have always been competitive, but this is important to her." Competitive? As if I'd ever competed. As if I'd ever had anything to compete with. Elena had always been the sun, bright and impossible to look at directly, warming everyone around her. I'd been the moon, pale and distant, only visible when the sun went down. At work, I stared at spreadsheets until the numbers merged into meaningless shapes. My desk was grey, my cubicle was grey. The entire floor was designed in various shades of grey, as if to remind us that colour had no place in corporate accounting. Around me, keyboards clattered in rhythm, phones rang, conversations about quarterly reports and tax codes hummed in the background. My manager appeared beside my desk. "Rachel, got a minute?" In his office, he leaned against his desk with practiced casualness. "I've noticed your productivity has declined recently. Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine. Because if you're having personal issues, we have resources. Employee assistance programs, counselling." "I'm fine," I said again, the word tasting worse each time I used it. He studied me with the kind of concern that was really evaluation. "You're a good employee, Rachel. Reliable, steady, but reliable and steady don't get promotions. They get overlooked. I need to know you're still committed to your career here." I nodded automatically, the motion so practiced it required no thought. That night, Elena's celebration dinner was held at an expensive Italian restaurant, with cloth napkins and wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She glowed in the candlelight, her success worn like jewellery, visible and enviable. David sat beside her with his hand on her back, proprietary and proud. "Tell them about the bonus," my mother urged. Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and confident. "Mum, they don't want to hear about that." "I do," James said, leaning forward with interest he never showed in our own conversations. As Eleanor described her achievements, I watched my mother's face transform with pride, watched James hang on every word, watched David beam beside his accomplished wife, and I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller until I wondered if I was visible at all. "Rachel, you're so quiet," Eleanor said, turning to me with what looked like genuine concern. "How's your writing going?" The table went silent. My mother's expression shifted to something like embarrassment. James suddenly found his wineglass fascinating. "It's fine," I said. "Still working on that novel?" Eleanor pressed, kindness in her voice that somehow felt worse than mockery. "You've been working on it for so long. That's real dedication." "She has a real job too," my mother interjected quickly, as if my writing was something shameful that needed to be balanced by legitimate employment. "Senior accountant, very stable position." "Of course," Eleanor said smoothly. "I just think it's nice that Rachel has a creative outlet. Everyone needs a hobby." There it was again, that word, hobby. James spoke up, his voice careful. "Rachel's very talented. I've read some of her work. It's quite good." "You have?" I stared at him. In 3 years, he'd never asked to read anything I'd written. He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, pieces here and there, when you left your laptop open." So he'd read my work without asking, in fragments, passively, the way one might glimpse someone else's mail. Not because he cared, but because it was there. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I think it's wonderful that you have passion for something. Really. Even if it never goes anywhere, at least you're doing what makes you happy." "Even if it never goes anywhere," the words echoed in my head for the rest of dinner, through dessert, through goodbyes, through the silent drive home with James. They followed me into the apartment, into the bedroom, into the darkness where I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Beside me, James snored softly. On the nightstand, my phone glowed with a notification, an email from one of the literary agents I'd queried months ago. "Dear Rachel, thank you for your query. Unfortunately, your manuscript doesn't fit our current needs. The market for this type of story is extremely competitive, and we don't feel we could represent it effectively. Best of luck in your future endeavours." I read it 3 times, each word settling into my bones like cold. 17 queries, 17 variations of the same rejection. The market is competitive. We don't feel we could represent it. Good luck. Keep trying. Maybe next time. But there wouldn't be a next time, would there? Because everyone was right. My mother, Eleanor, James, my boss, the agents, They all saw the same truth I'd been running from. Writing wasn't a career. It was a hobby, a waste of time, a fantasy. I got out of bed and walked to my desk. The laptop sat closed, dark and quiet. I opened it and stared at the document, at the words I'd poured my heart into, at the story I'd believed mattered. My finger moved to the delete key. I held it there for a long time, feeling the choice, crystallize in the silence. 3 years of work, 60,000 words, hours stolen from sleep, from James, from my career, from my family, all of it summed up in a single keystroke. But I couldn't do it. My hand trembled above the keyboard, tears blurring the screen, and I couldn't make myself destroy it. Not yet, not tonight. Instead, I opened a new document and began to type. Not a story this time, something else. I, Rachel Morrison, being of sound mind and clear purpose, do hereby acknowledge that my pursuit of writing has been nothing more than a selfish waste of time and energy. I acknowledge that my family is right to be disappointed in me, that my husband is right to ignore my work, that my sister is right to pity my lack of real accomplishment. I acknowledge that I have failed, and that it is time to stop pretending I am anything more than what I am. Ordinary, unremarkable, exactly fine. I stared at the words, feeling them cut deeper than any rejection letter. Then I saved the document, closed the laptop, and went back to bed. I didn't sleep. I lay in the darkness feeling hollow, feeling finished, feeling like someone had scooped out everything that made me myself and left only an empty shape behind. The next morning, I couldn't get out of bed. My body felt heavy, pressed down by some invisible weight. James left for work without noticing. The hours passed in grey silence. When I finally moved, it was mechanical. I showered without feeling the water. I dressed without seeing myself in the mirror. I went to work and sat at my desk and stared at spreadsheets without comprehending the numbers. Rachel, my co-worker appeared at my cubicle. Did you hear me? Are you okay? I looked up at her, saw her mouth moving, heard sounds that might have been words. Fine, I said. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. Something had broken inside me, something fundamental and load-bearing, and everything was collapsing inward. That night I sat at my laptop again. The document with my confession stared back at me. I read it over and over, each time feeling the words embed themselves deeper. The story beside it, my novel, my dream, suddenly looked childish, naive, embarrassing. I thought about deleting both, starting fresh, becoming the person everyone wanted me to be. Instead, I just sat there, frozen between two versions of myself, unable to move forward or back. My phone rang. Eleanor. Hey, I wanted to check on you. You seemed off at dinner. I'm fine. Rachel, you keep saying that, but... She paused. Look, I know it's hard being around me sometimes. I know Mom can be difficult, but you have to stop taking everything so personally. Not everyone is meant to be extraordinary. Some people are just steady, reliable, and that's okay. Some people are just... The words hung in the air like a sentence being passed. I have to go, I said. Rachel, I'm trying to help you. Someone needs to be honest with you about your writing. You're talented, but talent isn't enough. You need to be practical. You need to think about your future, your marriage, your career. You need to let go of this fantasy before it ruins everything real in your life. I ended the call. My hand was shaking so badly I dropped the phone. It clattered on the desk beside the laptop, beside the confession, beside the novel, beside all the evidence of my failure. And then I felt it. A strange sensation in my chest, like something tearing. A sharp pain that spread through my ribs, into my throat, up into my head. The room tilted. The laptop screen blurred and doubled. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't hold me. I fell. barely registering the impact of the floor against my knees, my hands, my face. The ceiling spun above me. Voices echoed from far away, muffled and meaningless. James, my mother, Eleanor, my boss, the literary agents, all of them speaking at once, their words overlapping into a chorus of disappointment and dismissal. Hobby, waste of time. Unrealistic. Selfish, ordinary. Fine. The pain in my chest expanded until it filled everything. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't remember why I'd wanted to. And then, slowly, the pain faded. The voices quieted. The ceiling stopped spinning and began to darken. In the growing darkness, I felt something like peace, or maybe just the absence of struggle. My body relaxed, my mind stilled. The desperate grasping toward approval, toward success, toward mattering, all of it released and drifted away. I thought about my novel one last time, about the characters I'd created, the world I'd built, the story I'd wanted to tell. It had been real to me, even if it was real to no one else. That had to be enough. That had to matter. The darkness completed itself. And I let it. When I opened my eyes, I was 27 years old. I knew this immediately, with the kind of certainty that bypasses logic. I was lying in my old apartment, the one James and I had lived in before we bought the house. The ceiling had the same water stain in the corner, shaped like a bird. The walls were the same pale blue I'd chosen, and my mother had called impractical. The morning light came through the same thin curtains at the same angle. But I was different. I sat up slowly, feeling my younger body move with an ease I'd forgotten. My hands were smooth, the nails unbitten. When I stood and looked in the mirror, I saw my face 5 years younger, fewer lines around the eyes, more hope in the expression. Except the hope wasn't there anymore. I looked at my reflection and saw something else. Understanding, memory, the weight of what came after. I knew what this was. Impossible, illogical, but undeniable. I'd been given a second chance, a restart. Everything that had happened, the decline, the breaking, the ending, was ahead of me now, preventable, changeable, or maybe I'd simply gone insane in that final moment, and this was my dying brain's gift to itself. Either way, I was here. I was 27, and I remembered everything. I found my phone on the nightstand. The date confirmed it. 5 years earlier, almost to the day. A text from James said he'd be home late, working on a big case. A voicemail from my mother reminded me about Elena's birthday dinner that weekend. Eleanor, who at 23 was already climbing the corporate ladder, already drawing comparisons between us. I deleted both without responding and opened my laptop. The novel I'd been working on at 32 didn't exist yet, but a different document sat in my drafts folder. An early version of the same story, rough and unpolished, maybe 30,000 words. I read through it with my older eyes, seeing its potential clearly now, seeing exactly where it needed work. But more importantly, I remembered what happened when I poured 5 more years into it. I remembered the 17 rejections. I remembered my family's dismissal. I remembered dying inside before I died for real, killed by the weight of my own unfulfilled dreams and everyone else's disappointment. I closed the laptop. For 3 days, I moved through my younger life like a ghost, observing everything with detachment. James came home late each night, distracted and tired, barely noticing me. I went to work at the accounting firm, performing my duties mechanically, seeing my colleagues with new eyes, seeing how small this world was, how grey, how limiting. On the 4th day, Elena called about her birthday dinner. "I hope you're coming," she said, her voice bright with youth and confidence. "Mum really wants us all there." "I'll be there," I said. "Great. And Rachel, maybe don't mention your writing thing at dinner. You know how Mum gets." In my first life, I'd agreed immediately, swallowed my hurt, made myself smaller. This time, I felt something different settle into my chest, something cool and clear and utterly calm. Actually, Eleanor, I'll mention whatever I want. It's your birthday dinner, not a referendum on my life choices. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, I was just trying to help you avoid an uncomfortable situation. I know. Thank you. I kept my voice pleasant, neutral. I'll see you Saturday. I ended the call before she could respond, feeling the shift already beginning. This wasn't anger or rebellion, this was simply knowing my worth and refusing to apologize for it. That night, I opened my laptop again. Instead of working on the novel, I researched self-publishing platforms, marketing strategies, cover design, social media for authors, all the information I'd been too afraid to explore before, too convinced I needed a traditional publisher's validation. I worked until 3 a.m., absorbing everything, building a plan. When James finally came home and found me still awake, he frowned. "You're up late." "Working on something," I said. "The Anderson account?" "No, my novel." He blinked, surprised by the directness. "Oh, I thought you'd mean you haven't mentioned it in a while. I'm mentioning it now." He stood in the doorway, uncertain how to respond to this version of me. "Okay, well, don't stay up too late. You need rest." "I'll rest when I'm finished." He went to bed without me, and I kept working, feeling more awake than I'd been in years, in 2 lifetimes. Saturday came. Elena's birthday dinner at the same Italian restaurant, the same people, the same dynamics I'd lived through once before. But this time, when my mother asked what I'd been up to, I didn't deflect. "I'm finishing my novel," I said clearly. "And then I'm publishing it myself." The table went quiet. Eleanor paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. James stared at me. My mother's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, concern, disapproval. "Self-publishing?" My mother said the words like they tasted bad. "Rachel, isn't that what people do when real publishers reject them?" "It's what people do when they want control over their own work," I said calmly. "The publishing industry is changing. Self-published authors are succeeding all the time." "But wouldn't it be better to try the traditional route first?" Eleanor asked, her tone reasonable and gently condescending. "Get validation from professionals." "I don't need validation from professionals," I said, looking directly at her. "I need to finish my story and share it with readers. That's all." My mother exchanged a look with Eleanor, the kind of look that said she'll learn and let her fail. James said nothing, but his silence felt heavy with doubt. I didn't argue further. I didn't defend myself or explain or try to convince them. I simply smiled slightly and changed the subject, asking Eleanor about her job, her life, her accomplishments. And I listened with genuine interest, because I knew something they didn't. In 5 years, her success would still be impressive, but it wouldn't diminish me. Nothing could diminish me anymore. I'd already died from trying to shrink myself. I wouldn't do it again. The next morning, I woke before dawn and sat at my laptop. The novel stared back at me, imperfect, rough, but alive with potential. I began to revise, cutting ruthlessly, strengthening weaknesses, polishing until the prose gleamed. I worked every morning before work and every evening after. James noticed, making occasional comments about my dedication or asking if I was obsessed. I smiled and kept writing. My mother called to check on me, her concern thinly veiling criticism. I kept the calls short and kind. Eleanor sent texts about family gatherings, always with a little dig about my hobby. I responded with simple affirmations and continued working. 6 weeks later, I finished the novel. 90,000 words, edited and polished and ready. I designed a cover using freelance sites, formatted the manuscript, wrote the description, set the price. And then, on a Tuesday morning before work, I pressed publish. The Last Light went live on Amazon at 8:47 a.m. I told no one, not James, not my family, not my coworkers. I simply sent the link to the small network of beta readers I'd connected with online, readers who'd given me feedback throughout the process, readers who actually cared about the story because they weren't blinded by their expectations of who I should be. The first review appeared within hours. 5 stars. A haunting, beautiful story about finding yourself after losing everything. I couldn't put it down. Then another, and another. I watched the numbers climb slowly. Downloads, sales, reviews, each one a small validation that readers existed for my work, that my voice mattered to someone, even if it didn't matter to the people closest to me. After 2 weeks, I'd made $500. After a month, $2,000. The numbers weren't life-changing, but they represented something more important. I was a published author. People were reading my words, and not one of them had asked if I was being realistic or practical or sensible. I still said nothing to my family. 3 months after publication, The Last Light found its audience. A popular book blogger reviewed it, calling it a hidden gem and criminally underrated. Sales jumped, reviews multiplied. The novel climbed steadily up the rankings in its category. James noticed when the royalty check arrived. "What's this?" he asked, holding the envelope. "Payment for my novel?" I said calmly, not looking up from my laptop where I was writing the sequel. He opened it, stared at the amount. $5,000. Rachel, that's for the last quarter. It's growing. He sat down across from me, the check still in his hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You never asked," I said, meeting his eyes. "You never asked if I'd finished it. You never asked if I'd published it. You never asked how it was doing, so I didn't tell you." His face went through several expressions: hurt, confusion, something that might have been shame. "I didn't know you wanted me to ask." "I wanted you to care," I said simply. "There's a difference." He set the check down carefully. "I do care about you." "About me, yes. About my writing. I don't think you ever did. It's okay. I'm not angry. I just know the difference now." He left the room without responding, and I returned to my manuscript. The sequel was flowing faster than the first book, my fingers flying across the keyboard as if making up for lost time. And, in a way, I was. In my first life, this story would never have been written. In this one, it already existed in my mind, complete and waiting. 6 months after publication, during a family dinner at my parents' house, Eleanor brought it up. "So, I heard from a friend that you published a book," she said, her tone careful. "On Amazon?" "I did." My mother looked up sharply. "What book?" "The novel I was working on, The Last Light. It came out 6 months ago." 6 months? My mother's voice rose slightly. "And you didn't tell us?" "You never wanted to hear about it when I was writing it," I said pleasantly. "I didn't think you'd want to hear about it after publication either." Eleanor leaned forward, her expression caught between curiosity and something else. "How's it doing?" "Well, very well, actually." "Have you sold many copies?" my mother asked, skepticism clear in her voice. "About 15,000 so far. The sequel comes out next month." The room went silent. Eleanor's fork clattered against her plate. James, who'd known for months but said nothing, stared at his hands. 15,000, Eleanor repeated. That's actually impressive, Rachel." "Thank you." "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked again, her voice different now, hurt maybe, or confused. I looked at her calmly. "Because when I was writing it, you called it a waste of time. When I talked about publishing, you said I needed to be practical. When I tried to share my passion with you, you compared me to Eleanor and found me lacking. I learned not to share things with people who don't want to celebrate them." My mother's face flushed. "I was trying to protect you from disappointment." "You were trying to make me someone I'm not. There's a difference." I kept my voice gentle, not accusatory, just honest. I love you, Mum, but I don't need your approval anymore. I needed it for a long time and it hurt when I didn't have it, but I don't need it now. I turned to Helena, and I'm happy for your success. Genuinely. You're good at what you do and you deserve your achievements. But my success doesn't diminish yours and yours doesn't diminish mine. We can both matter. Eleanor's eyes were bright, possibly with tears. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry, Rachel. I didn't realize I was making you feel that way. I know. That's the problem, isn't it? You didn't realize because I made myself small enough that you never had to notice. The dinner continued awkwardly, conversation stilted and careful. But something had shifted. Some fundamental balance had tipped. I was no longer the family disappointment. The sister who wasted time on fantasies. The daughter who refused to be practical. I was simply myself. And that was enough. The second novel launched to strong pre-orders. Readers who'd loved The Last Light were hungry for more, and I'd spent months cultivating my author platform, connecting with readers online, building genuine relationships with people who cared about stories, not about whether I was living up to someone else's expectations. A year after my rebirth, I quit the accounting firm. James was supportive but worried. My mother was horrified. Elena was quietly envious. I didn't need any of their responses. I knew what I was doing. I wrote full-time, published 2 books a year, watched my readership grow steadily. The money was good. Not extraordinary, but enough to live on, enough to prove this wasn't a hobby. It was a career. My career. James and I divorced amicably after 2 years. The split had been inevitable since the moment I'd chosen myself over his comfort. We'd married young, both becoming people we hadn't been at the start, growing in different directions. He'd wanted someone steady and predictable. I'd become someone who lived in stories and believed in impossible things like second chances. I don't understand what happened to you, he said as we signed the papers. You used to be different. I used to be dying, I said gently. Now I'm alive. That's the only difference. My mother came around slowly. She read my books eventually, all of them, and called me crying after finishing the 3rd. I didn't know you could do this, she said. I didn't know you had this in you. You never looked, I said, not unkindly. Eleanor and I rebuilt our relationship carefully, honestly. She admitted her jealousy of my freedom, my passion, my willingness to risk everything for something I believed in. I admitted my resentment of her ease, her success, her ability to fit so perfectly into the mold our family had created. I think I was afraid, she told me one day over coffee. Afraid that if you succeeded at something unconventional, it meant I'd been wrong to play it safe. Or maybe we're just different people, I said, and that's okay. Your way isn't wrong. My way isn't wrong. They're just different. She smiled, and it looked genuine. When did you get so wise? I thought about dying at 32, about being given a second chance, about learning that the only approval I truly needed was my own. It took me a while, I said. 3 years after my rebirth. The Last Light was optioned for film. 5 years after, I had 12 published novels and a readership that spanned the globe. 7 years after, I was invited to speak at a writers' conference about my journey from corporate accountant to full-time author. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, readers, writers, dreamers, I thought about my first life, about dying in the darkness of my apartment, feeling like a failure, believing I'd wasted everything on a fantasy that didn't matter. And I thought about the moment I'd opened my eyes at 27, carrying the weight of those memories, knowing exactly what would happen if I followed the same path. The hardest thing I ever did, I told the audience, was choosing to believe in myself when no one else did. Not my family, not my husband, not even the professionals whose job it was to recognize talent. Everyone told me to be practical, to give up, to stop wasting time on something that would never work. I paused, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. And they were all wrong. Not because they were cruel, but because they couldn't see what I saw. They couldn't value what I valued. They measured success by their own standards and found me lacking. So I stopped measuring myself by their standards. I found my own, and everything changed. The applause was warm and sustained. After the talk, dozens of people approached me, many of them with stories like mine, dreams they'd been told to abandon, passions they'd been shamed for pursuing. I listened to each one, seeing myself reflected in their struggles, and told them the same thing in different ways. You already know what you need to do. You're just afraid to do it. Don't waste your life on fear. That evening, I returned to my apartment, not the grey rental I'd shared with James in my first life, but a bright space in the arts district, full of light and books and the evidence of a life fully lived. I made tea and opened my laptop, looking at the beginning of novel number 13. My phone buzzed. Eleanor, just finished your latest. Rachel, it's your best work yet. I'm so proud of you. I smiled and set the phone aside. It was nice to hear, genuinely, but I didn't need it the way I once had. The validation I'd craved so desperately in my first life, from my family, from agents, from anyone who might tell me I was good enough. I'd learned to give myself. I'd learned that being told you're wasting your time is just someone else's fear talking. That being called impractical is often just being called brave by people who are too afraid to be brave themselves. That hobby and career and dream and reality are just words, and the only person who gets to define which is you. I opened a new document and began to type, the words flowing easily now, each sentence a quiet assertion of my right to exist exactly as I was. In my first life, I'd died believing I was a failure. In this one, I'd learned that failure was just a story I'd been telling myself, or rather, a story everyone else had been telling me that I'd mistaken for truth. The truth was simpler. I was a writer. I'd always been a writer. And whether anyone else acknowledged it, or celebrated it, or believed in it had never actually mattered. What mattered was the story. The words, the act of creation itself. Everything else was just noise. I wrote until dawn, watching the sky lighten through my window, feeling the quiet satisfaction of doing exactly what I was meant to do. When I finally saved the document and closed my laptop, I felt something I'd rarely experienced in my first life. Peace. Not the peace of resignation or surrender, the peace of alignment, of living in truth, of knowing that if I died tomorrow, I would die as myself, not as the person my family wanted me to be, not as the person society told me I should be, but as exactly who I was. A writer who believed in impossible things, like second chances, like quiet victories, like the power of choosing yourself, even when everyone else chooses for you to be different. I made coffee and watched the sunrise, thinking about all the people who told me to stop wasting my time, wondering if they knew yet, wondering if they'd ever understand that the time I'd wasted writing was the only time I'd ever truly lived, wondering if it mattered whether they understood or not, and realizing, finally, that it didn't. The only story that mattered was the one I was still writing, not on the page, but in the fabric of my life itself. A story about a woman who died believing she was nothing, and was reborn knowing she was everything she needed to be. A story about learning that the only validation worth having is the kind you give yourself. A story that ended not with applause or recognition or revenge, but with something quieter and more profound. The sound of fingers on a keyboard, words appearing on a screen, and the steady, certain knowledge that this, right here, right now, exactly this, was what I was meant to do. And no one, not even myself, in my moments of deepest doubt, could take that from me again.